Namaskar, sir.
Namaskar, Shankar.
It is my pleasure to have you with this talk on a very special topic about the contribution of Sitaram Goel, Ram Swaroop ji, and Voice of India.
Yes, it is my honor to be with you and to address these very important thinkers, their contribution.
So, first thing I was wondering that I've been studying the works of Voice of India and Ram Swaroop, Sitaram Goel for almost more than 2 decades. And for a long time, I have been in JNU, I did my PhD, and I have been associated with all kind of academic works, the secular, communal, and all these categories. So for a long time, I heard about Ram Swaroop, Sitaram Goel, yourself, Koenraad, Arun, Shourie, and the entire work of Voice of India, that the left and secular scholars, they dismissed it as, all these are RSS propaganda, these writers are just employed by RSS to say all these nasty things. So how come when this RSS BJP is in power, and for a long time,
yes,
how come that the works of Voice of India, especially Ram Swaroop, Sitaram Goel, some of your works, Koenraad's, all these works are still, I see, as marginalized in social sciences scholarship and teaching and reading, although some of them are very relevant, scholarly and topically, politically, and yet they are marginalized. So I see it is a kind of contradictory situation. Why?
Well, first of all, the RSS particularly has been supported Voice of India, and many of their books they buy. In fact, this last year I did a program with Mohan Bhagwat, and there was a special release of a selection of one of Ram Swaroop's books that I had written the foreword for. So in that case, it's there. In terms of the academia keeps RSS and all these groups out in any case, and publications they want to avoid. So essentially, we were labeled 20-some years ago as right-wing, as fanatic in some ways, as propaganda. But the actual fact is the Marxist view of history is only propaganda. Deconstructionist Marxism teaches that there's no such thing as history, that all history must be interpreted in terms of current political relevance. And so it goes back to that old control of the ecosystem, but we do hope in the long run that more of these teachings will be brought into the academic world, and that there will be major educational changes in India to do that.
Yeah, but the entire academia, it is already observed by so many good scholars that the entire left and Marxist propaganda about history and society, it has succeeded only because of the support of the state power.
Yes.
So now the state power is in other hands.
Yes.
Why it is so difficult to turn the tide and make genuine scholarship available?
I can only speculate.
Please.
But there is, of course, the ecosystem was created. The ecosystem is strong. It's connected to the bureaucracy, and then they've prevented other teachers from coming up. So when it comes to the candidates available who have these positions or qualifications, it's limited largely to their group. But it's not a field in which I can claim to have inside information. The only thing I can say is I think there's going to be more changes now in Modi's second term. And also there were many other issues. Now you see Kashmir, you see Ayodhya, you see things coming on. So I would say let us be more positive and hope, because I do see changes coming.
Yeah, thank you. After this last Lok Sabha election results, there were so many renowned leftist or even secular scholars or journalists. They accepted that they failed to see the Hindu awakening or the Indian masses yearning for a kind of Indianness.
Yes.
So it is undeniable now that Modi first was not an accident, but it is a result of something deep going on within the Indian society. So what do you think that the contribution of Ram Swaroop and Sitaram Goel and Voice of India was or is in this awakening? How much you will apportion the credit to them?
Well, I think what happened was after independence, there was this movement to the left in the Indian academia, and the generation that took intellectual power after independence were not the people of the independence movement. And the Nehruvian Congress replaced the Gandhian Congress. The leftists threw out whatever traditional scholars or yogis there were. So that process occurred, but there was a kind of a deep-seated, I think, resentment over that and a greater expectation, and that matured slowly over the years because Indira Gandhi was able to hold some power because of the Bangladesh war and all those things, breakup of Pakistan. And then, of course, the Ayodhya movement started, and I think that also helped. But I think that in terms of intellectual articulation of the Hindu movement, Ram Swaroop and Sitaram Goel pioneered that. Now, they did rely on older sources like Sri Aurobindo, for example, but they also brought it more into political circles. And specifically, of course, Sitaram Goel was a communist, and Ram Swaroop took him out of the communism, but they were the only ones who developed a real critique against the communists. So they became the voice. They also had strong views, and they didn't hesitate to use strong language rather than compromise and all of that. So their voices were heard, and they came to represent that view. And they also wrote it in English idiom to address the elite of the country, took up the difficult issues, and the resonance was there. So I would say that in terms of the movement, it was happening anyway, but the intellectual articulation, I think, belongs more than half to them at a certain point, and I'm saying up to maybe 2000, that was the case. Then other people also started to take it up. And also, Voice of India published a lot of these authors because the other publishers would not take them. Whether it's me or Elst or Francois Gauthier or Subhash Kak or K.S. Lal, there were many that came out. And they were also not a kind of book business. So they kept the books inexpensive. They cultivated a certain readership, which on the long term also created this Hindu intellectual movement. And they influenced people in Europe, the pagan movement, and in the United States, like Hinduism today. So that outreach was also there.
Can we say that their influence first grew in the West more than in India?
No, their influence was more in India than the West, because the West doesn't understand these issues. The issue that the West picked up from them was the value of the Hindu tradition and connections with the pagan traditions. The Ayodhya movement would not be so known in the West. Of course, Koenraad Elst was able to pick that up in a special way. But they did have a voice that the Western people could read and resonate, particularly the critique of religion. And that's what they introduced, was a critique of Christianity and Islam from a Hindu point of view. Instead of this political correctness of all religions are the same. I mean, that may have some political thing where we should respect freedom of religion. But in terms of actual practice, the Hindu point of view on religion is very different than that of Christianity and Islam. And specifically, Ram Swaroop applied the rules of yogic states of consciousness to Christianity and Islam. And if we do that, a belief-based religion is a vikalpa. It's imagination, it's wishful thinking. There's no salvation by belief. There's no going to heaven. These are all, there's no final prophet. There's no day of last judgment. So bringing in the yogic perspective of states of consciousness and the need for self-realization, higher consciousness, which these traditions don't have, or they touch only very peripherally.
So in your long introduction to that, the last book of Ram Swaroop collection, the Hinduism and the monotheistic religions. Yes. So it is a very powerful introduction you wrote. I think you have mentioned there that so far as the critique of Abrahamic religions is concerned, the Ram Swaroop's critique is the best so far in all over the world.
Yes.
So could you elaborate that?
Yes, because again, on the Indian side, there was the tendency to kind of want to make all religions the same. So there wasn't a critique of Christianity and Islam. What was said is that Christ was a Hindu in disguise, and even Muhammad may have had some Hindu teachers along the way. It's sort of like telling them, you are also Hindus at a deeper level. But of course, they don't believe that. So what Ram Swaroop did is he took this understanding of states of consciousness in Hindu and Buddhist traditions. For example, there are many mixed states of samadhi in which the realization is colored by ego. And even they went back to Swami Vivekananda, who said some people can stumble into a state of samadhi and have powerful influence and insights, but still cause a lot of confusion and distortions. And he originally cited Muhammad for that. Later on, the Ramakrishna Mutt, I think, has maybe reduced or removed that reference. And so he applied this idea of states of consciousness. Now, relative to Jesus, the problem there is more of even identifying if he actually existed, because he's quite a composite figure over a period of time. But he applied the same idea to the God of the Bible. Because if you look at the God of the Bible, he has jealousy, he has chosen people, and so there's this sense that there's not a pure consciousness there. It's not like the formless Brahman or Paramatma beyond all things. It's a deity who's very much involved in the world and has a jealous God, all these things. So he applied that yogic critique that these are not deities of pure sattva or higher consciousness. Now even Bhagavad Gita says that shraddha or faith can be tamasic, rajasic, or sattvic. And if a faith has as its motive to convert other people and to convert the world, it is a rajasic dharma. It is not a sattvic dharma. Sattvic dharma has to be selfless or seeking of the higher knowledge. So we could almost say that there's an asuric rajasic trait in some of these Abrahamic traditions that he showed. Now, on one hand, that sounds a little bit intolerant, but if you look at the actual point of fact, those values and things are there, at least among the majority of the people who follow these things. There may be some exceptional mystical people here and there. And sometimes we have to be careful with the Judaic tradition because they interpret their tradition a little bit differently than Christianity and Islam. They don't aim at conquering the world.
So since the comparative religion is a very established subject in the West,
yes,
I have seen that in Cambridge, Oxford, they have exclusive journals also in this.
Yes.
Unlike in our country where comparative religion is not at all a subject
Yes.
in our universities. So I was wondering, since the works of Ram Swaroop and Sitaram Goel is now more than 2 or 3 decades.
Yes.
So is it that the appreciation of their work is noted in Western scholarship now?
It's only noted, I would say, among certain Hindu groups like Hinduism today. What happens is comparative religion in the West is an academic subject, and in their academic world, you are only acknowledged if you have their academic credentials and peer review, which means that you're one of them. And a lot of their comparative religion now is on political issues, gender issues, rich versus poor, different social issues. They seldom examine theology, and they have no examination of higher states of consciousness or even ontology, which we have in the Hindu system, the Vedantic system. There is some study of Vedanta they have, but they also keep it at a superficial level, or they kind of borrow from it. So now, the Hindu gurus like Maharishi Mahesh Yogi brought in the concepts of meditation. So now the Christians are saying, yes, we also have Christian meditation. We have Christian prayer. We have Christian yoga, Christian mantra. Yeah. So that has gone on. But there's in all these interfaith gatherings, there's no real examination of theology. There's no critique of theology. In your view,
this interfaith dialogues going on for a long time, do you think that it is going somewhere? It is positive?
Well, I think there's some gain in communication. But overall, you have to understand that the interfaith is based upon a faith-based model of religion, which the Hindus don't have. Hindus, Buddhist is based upon knowledge. So there must be questioning and debate. And faith in the Western tradition, Abrahamic tradition, is often faith in something irrational, like the virgin birth or Muhammad going to heaven on the horse and all these different things. So the idea is you accept somebody else's faith. So I sometimes tell a little bit of a joke here. I say that ordinary religious people accept one irrational faith, and interfaith people accept all irrational faiths.
Very nice.
So that is, and I've been to interfaith gatherings, and to me I compare it to representatives from different countries pushing their economic policies. Because they're there to say, we're also Christians, we're Muslims, we're Shia, we're Sunni, whatever it is, and we're also modern, we're liberal, we treat women well, you know, we're open-minded, but there's no questioning of their actual activity, and I've never seen conversion questioned in an interfaith situation.
Yeah, even Rajiv Malhotra says that. So one thing, coming back to our situation in our country, so I noticed in the writings of the Sitaram Goel that even in the early 50s, when Nehru was prime minister and he started his work about educating about Soviet Union and China, and I noticed that he was known to not only the prime minister but all his intellectual
Yes.
assistants of the time. So in a way, I would say that his stature was very high. Though he was notorious, he was a kind of dreaded,
Yes.
that he is doing a nasty work against Soviet Union and China. But how come whatever he did about the communism, secularism, writing right history, all this, why the non-communist streams of India, the Gandhians, the other political parties, including Jana Sangha, why they failed to capitalize or use the work of Ram Swaroop about re-educating our people about true history, comparative religion, secularism and everything, which theoretically they were with Sitaram Goel, but they failed to appreciate and use it. Why? What do you think that, what was the reason?
Well, I can only speculate there because I don't have direct knowledge of that period. But what I will say is he was the voice against communism, and many people took up his ideas without necessarily mentioning him.
Okay.
And Nehru was their political power was very strong, and they were also very vindictive, and Indira Gandhi was more so. So there was, I think, a certain hesitation on that side. And at the same time, they did not have so much good outreach into the non-English speaking communities. So I think that might have limited their influence a bit. But as to why they weren't taken up more, I don't know. And I also don't know why, you know, Sri Aurobindo criticized communism quite a bit, but why the gurus who came after, after independence, became very otherworldly. Sarvadharma, Samabhava, and we won't get engaged with political action. Swami Chinmayananda was an exception there. So there were some things going on, but at that time the power of the Nehruvian group and taking over all the institutions was going on full force.
So one more thing, since after Sitaram Goel and Ram Swaroop and Sitaram Goel, the voice of India is almost stagnant and not going very far. What do you see the legacy of Voice of India and these two great men? Is it going on?
Well, you have to understand, I think Ram Swaroop passed away in 1998.
Yes.
And Sitaram Goel in 2003. And then Sitaram Goel's son passed away very shortly after that. And their whole operation was run mainly by them. So the succeeding people could only just keep books in print or occasional new thing. And then their very success limited them in a way. Because after 2000, 2003, there were so many other writers taking up those ideas that the emphasis on Voice of India and the fact that these two figures were no more faded into the background, but their ideas expanded. And then people today tend to associate an idea in the book that they read, not necessarily in its origins.
Yes.
So there are a number of the writers out there who are basically taking on the ideas of Ram Swaroop and Sitaram Goel. In fact, the whole Hindu intellectual movement is taking things from them. And some of their writers, that some of us are still writing, even Meenakshi Jain, you mentioned, Koenraad, Elst, etc., Francois Gautier. So these other things are coming out, and now they're also coming out with other publishers. And over the last few years, more mainstream publishers, like I've been publishing with Bloomsbury, Penguin has taken up some things. Sanjeev Sanyal is anotal one. So because of the success of their ideas And the fact that they never promoted their personalities, they're not like
Yes.
Gurudev.
They were very particular about it.
Yeah,
Yes.
so that the ideas have continued, but the association with them has kind of faded in the background, both because of the lack of resources in the Voice of India publishing company, but also because other people have taken up these concepts. And I've also noticed that overall, people's memory about writers is short. Just as the writing gets shorter. For example, they weren't on the social media. I only picked up the social media a couple, 2-3 years ago because I had ignored it. Then I saw that if you don't get into social media, you miss a certain audience. And then they never had anyone who could really promote them.
Yes,
And
that
that
was
was
great.
an issue. But they have also, I say, they're still very strong in certain RSS currents. And this, a number of the books have gone into other languages. So the legacy is there, but the attribution to them is not entirely there.
Okay. One more thing, I think when this Ayodhya movement started, it was Sitaram Goel who actually provided the intellectual arguments and facts. He produced the 2-volume Hindu temples, what happened to them. So since the Ayodhya issue is going to be settled very soon, which in any way. So what do you guess, what about the other temples, especially Mathura and Kashi? What do you visualize this future going to be on the issue of at least these two or few important temples?
Yes.
How do you think it is going to shape now?
Well, also we should give credit for Koenraad Elst for his works on Ayodhya.
He did, yes.
But the idea of taking back those 4 temples came from the Vishwa Hindu Parishad, starting in 1984. And so they also have to be given credit for raising the issue. Now, Ram Swaroop and Sitaram Goel gave them a greater intellectual articulation, but they were working on the ground. And of course, some of their members were killed, and they suffered quite a bit. And then the taking down of the Babri Masjid, all of that, these were other people involved, but they gave an intellectual basis for that. And essentially, they wanted those 4 temples back. And I once asked them, why do you focus on Ayodhya? And because the other temples, Kashi Vishwanath, the mosque still has part of the temple. There's no debate on who tore the temple down and the fact that the temple was there. Same way with the Krishna Janmabhoomi. They were both destroyed by Aurangzeb. Whereas with Ayodhya, the left was arguing that there was never a temple there. So I said that the reply I got is said, if we can get that one back, then we can get so many back. In any case, that was their choice. So definitely, now the other temple, at least those other 2 you have to give back, and several more.
So going by that argument, there's evidence. Mathura and Kashi should be very easy, but I don't think it is going to be easy.
Well, nothing's going to be easy, but I think definitely Kashi Vishwanath Modi is preparing that. He's prepared the corridor. He's prepared the connection with Kashi Vishwanath. So it's quite obvious that the mosque and the history everybody knows. So I think at some point the Muslims will almost want to give that up because it kind of highlights them in a negative light. And if the Hindus are strong, this will all be forgotten in a day. If these temples were taken back in 1947, they'd be a total non-issue beyond that. And today, Kashmir is a much bigger issue. You're only talking about a 3-acre parcel of which 1 acre you're disputing. So I think some of the temples will have to come back over time. I think the Shias were willing to give up 9. So let us see. And they should come back not because they're just Hindu monuments, because they're Indian monuments. They're the culture, the architecture, the history. So I think the case has to be made for them as well. And I think that work Sitaram did is very helpful. I think didn't they put him into jail for putting that book out? Even though he only quoted Islamic sources? Yes, he was oppressed for doing that, by just mentioning what the Muslims themselves had said. And then the leftists denied. They say, well, the Muslims exaggerated what they did. And the real enemy, though, was the left, more so actually than the Islamic groups. And you have to remember that at the time of Nehru, there was no real Islamist movement. The terrorist movement. That started a little bit in the 70s. It wasn't until the 90s and then 9/11 that has come out. So even by that standard, the the issues are stronger today.
Right. And, recently, the same question was asked to Koenraad Elst, that now there is going to be settled some way. So, what do you foresee about Mathura and Kashi? He made a very interesting statement that why you are going after all these temples individually? Why don't you claim over the entire Muslim population who were Hindus, who became Muslim under duress? So why don't you try to woo them back into Hindu fold? And when they come back, even in a small number, they will bring all those places to you. So how far you think it is realistic, or what is your view on this point? Winning back the Muslims to Hindu
Well,
fold.
bringing back the Muslim to Hindu fold is a good idea, but at the same time, you can take Kashi and Vishnu, and that actually gives them more. Then they see that the Hindus are serious. If the Hindus aren't taking back their own holy sites, why should we join them? Because are they going to protect us once we do that? And of course, the Shias are not so much against all these aspects of the Hindu Dharma. It's certain radical Sunnis. The problem is that we have so many radical Sunni madrasas that are being funded in India. And so the people who come out of those are going to be very hesitant to make those changes. But I do think that over time that the Muslim population will recognize their Bharatiya roots in various ways. And I think there'll be a movement away from the Wahhabi Islam. And I think long term that is beneficial, but you have to deal with Islam with strength. Look at what China has done. Nobody's complaining in the Islamic world. And you also have to do some understanding of the Islamic world. What has Modi done? Modi has the support of Saudi and UAE versus Pakistan. How did he do that? Because he recognized that the common enemy of the Muslim Brotherhood was the real problem, and Pakistan has been supporting Muslim Brotherhood, and so they're more of a threat to the Islamic world. A lot of these Islamic terrorist groups want to take out the moderate Islamic governments. So if you understand the politics there, it's not just a question of going after the Muslims, but of eliminating the terrorist forces.
So recently, BBC has done a survey that 10 years ago, in the Muslim world, Muslim countries, the 10 years ago, the same age group, they had a certain percentage who believed in the Islamist ideologies and their creeds and etc. So they have noted that there is a drop in the percentage of such Muslims who actually believe on those things about Muhammad and Quran. So do you think it is realistic to say that the disillusion with Islam among the Muslim countries, among the Muslim population, is increasing, or is it still a vague idea?
From my experience, I can't claim to have a lot of it, but we do have some connections via Dubai and Saudi and Pakistan and other places, that's likely to happen. And also the social media can also do that because people can see what people in the rest of the world have. And even in Kashmir, once development comes, then a lot of these religious issues will go away. And once the funding, the terrorism, and the social media propagation of the Wahhabi, it will change. I think that's eventual. But the problem is there going to be a major crisis or breakdown in the meantime? That we don't know. Because we have all this struggle going on. Essentially, we have three groups. We have the Shia, then you have the moderate Sunni, or the ones that are anti-terrorist, and then you have the Muslim Brotherhood inspired in the Pakistani. So they have their own internal conflicts, and we have the issues of the Middle East and the Gulf of Hormuz and the moving of the oil. So it is possible that may blow up. We don't know. I think there's be a lot of hesitation to do so, but the fact is India has to be strong in its own identity, and the Indian identity is not simply like an Abrahamic identity. It is an identity based upon higher knowledge, and it's an identity that's not based upon religious belief in the Western sense, but it does honor the guru, the yoga, the rishi, the sadhana, all of that. And so that shouldn't be a problem long term, but there's still you see a lot of division in the world, and you see how America is divided, Europe is divided. So the possibility of these things blowing up is possible. If things will be, India seems to be better. because the government is taking a strong thing. And you'll notice that when the government has some strength, then the people accept. No one would believe that Kashmir was taken so easily. No one would believe. They'd think there would be riots in Kashmir and international outrage, which there wasn't. There was much more outrage about India's nuclear testing.
Much more, yes.
And yet India overcame that.
So recently you made a comment on your Twitter that India and China, they are old civilizations and they have so many things in common, and it has been unexplored for a long time. So maybe in future it can their cultural relation or educational relation can grow. So would you explain that, or?
Well, if you look at the Chinese culture, it has a strong Buddhist element, as you know. And even the Taoist element has certain connections, Taoist yoga, healing, etc., connected to India. So they have a common dharmic heritage that they can go into. The divisions were more, of course, in the communist era. And also they've had preserving their culture, resisting Islamists and other groups. They have a common interest in those areas. India is not a threat to China. Not going to invade China. China thinks it owns these peripheral territories, but the fact is that, Ranjit Singh had his troops had control of Kailas, Mansarovar. Nobody in China knows about Kailas and Mansarovar. Everybody in India does. So China was kind of intimidated by the West, and they've become a bit aggressive, but they need to understand that India is not the enemy. Tibet is also.
But in India, there is a perception that China is a threat to India.
China can be a threat to India. It was in the past. But it was also in the past because India was weak. Now India also has a great deal to offer China as an economic market. So this idea, you have 1 billion plus in both countries. So I think there is some ground there. But again, India has to be strong. And China should go back more to its cultural roots that are pre-communist and honor its ancient culture, and that brings them closer to India. But the Chinese are doing that a bit. We have to encourage, but still there's, of course, the aggression is also there.
Sir, one final thing I wanted to ask, since it is considered that you are very influential in the ruling circles of RSS and BJP, so I was wondering that since this temple issue, this comparative religion, and the India being a center of so many religion and people living peacefully for a long time. So isn't it time to start academically comparative religion as a serious subject in our universities? Would you influence them to do this long overdue work?
Yes. Well, you have to understand, I think that influence is exaggerated. I'm only a kind of independent scholar. I don't have a massive corporation institution supporting me. And I've always maintained a certain independence of views. I have a wide variety of associates, but I do know many of them over many years. And so there's some potential connections there. But what I would say is education changes is the key to India. Comparative religion should be there, just as the Christians are doing a study of, for example, in Bangalore, they're studying Vedanta and what they can pull out for their own benefit. So there needs to be a Hindu critique of the other religions, and that should be acceptable in the academic realm because you have Islamic and Sikh and other critiques are allowed, but not Hindu. So that's a very important thing to take up, and comparative religion overall and understanding of the history. I think more will be done now. I read a few days ago that Amit Shah said history of India has to be rewritten from an Indian point of view, that he's someone who generally indicates that something is going to get done. And we have to consider that education is very important for national identity, national security, and also prosperity. Because if the narrative you teach your children about your country is negative, what does that inspire them to do? It turns them into a fifth column inside your country. It doesn't motivate them to be inspired to raise the culture more. So I think those changes in any case are going to be done. but we do encourage them to go forward, rewriting of history. Then I don't like the term rewriting. I would say correcting history, because what's happened is India today is probably the only country in the world in which the colonial narrative against it has not been changed. Remember, we had this very negative colonial narrative about Africa. You had a very negative colonial narrative about the Islamic world. You had it about the Native Americans. You had it about the Polynesians. So many groups. So it's time to get rid of that. What happened is the Marxists perpetuated the negative colonial narrative, dressing it up under their garb of, you know, leftist values or leftist concerns. So instead of the British being the enemy, the Hindus became the enemy. And instead of the independent India having freedom, they felt the need to keep the independent Hindus suppressed. Hindus are a majority. Don't they deserve a country?
Yes,
you know, democracy is majority rules, and yet we're told that Hindus were under minority rule for centuries, and then when they become independent, Hindus are majoritarian, they're oppressors, and they shouldn't be allowed to rule. The hypocrisy is there. So these changes must be made long-term, and they must come into the educational system.
You said accelerated, but I think that your position, as you are an independent thinker, you are a non-Indian, you are a non-political person, so that way your influence is really more matters. So don't you think that since the new education policy is under discussion, and have you seen that something on this regard about study of comparative religion or rewriting of Indian history, is it there in their agenda to set it right?
I haven't been given those papers, and I haven't seen those agendas at this point. I will try to find out more about them. This last trip to India, I've only been here since the 10th of October. We've been pushing these issues for decades, and they know that. And I think the work is going done. A lot has to be done behind the scenes, and a lot has to be done politically. For example, you really couldn't take Ayodhya before Kashmir. You have to understand that. So step by step. And now I think we go, you know, I have some faith in Modi that we have to go forward and we have to trust their judgment in certain areas and be a little patient. At the same time, you do need to always give positive feedback, and you have to also give constructive criticism if you feel it is necessary. But there's a difference between constructive criticism, and sometimes Hindus get very defeated. Oh, even with Modi, we can't get this and we can't get that. Why don't we quit? See, that doesn't inspire anyone. We are winning the battle. We are going forward. We have made tremendous gains in the 30 years I've watched things. And so we need to maintain that positive spirit. At the same time, we have to recognize there are major obstacles. Some of them are inside India, some of them are international, or the alliance between the leftist in India with outside groups. So you can't underestimate your enemy at any point, even if it seems to be someone idiotic like Rahul Gandhi. You can't underestimate the potential for more going on. But I would say we should create the material and the ideas so that it is there. It is there to draw upon, and to some extent we have produced books on history and other things. For Ram Swaroop and Sitaram Goel, creating I always said, get us selected works, 250 pages, and release that, and that as an introduction, and then you can bring in other works from there, and also long-term create more alliances between these different institutions. These things are going on. And I hope that many young people, in fact, many young people are taking this up.
Doing this.
And so let us have
yes,
a
this is very
positive
important.
view of the future, because the future is moving towards us, but at the same time, the world is getting more complex. And there's a lot of confusion in Europe and the United States that can blow back on India to some degree, although the Indo-American population, UK, United States, is becoming more powerful. And let us think that we had visionaries like Ram Swaroop and Sitaram Goel at a time when there were no voices, so that people had something to work on, and that even today we can go back and see how they were correct and the other people were wrong. So that legacy has to be honored. And I think the best way to honor that legacy is to continue continue with the writing, the teaching, and the critique. You know, we have a tradition of debate. And someone says, well, I've noticed, for example, that Hindus are not allowed to criticize Islam or Christianity, even by other Hindus, because they feel that's offensive. But yet these other people are criticizing you, and it's not a criticism, it's also what we call a critique. They are taking, in an open forum, they're exposing your limitations and telling people why you shouldn't follow Hindu Dharma. Now, if there's nobody to represent Hindu Dharma there, it's like abandoning the battlefield. But if we create a critique, particularly at a philosophical and theological level, they're very weak. Their strength is with their social alliances. But Christian theology and Islamic theology, with one God, with heaven and hell, with believers and non-believers, a jealous God, with final prophet, virgin birth, they can't hold a candle to the Vedantic insights of higher consciousness and self-realization, or even Buddhist insights into the mind. So that's what Ram Swaroop was doing, a critique of these traditions at theological, psychological, and philosophical, and cosmological level. Hindu cosmology is like modern physics. Islamic or Christian theology, they had a flat earth, they had living 5,000, 6,000 year calendar, all of that. And we also have to be willing to redefine Hindu Dharma, not let them do it, and then also reform it in certain areas that it may be necessary, and to also bring out all the connections of Hindu Dharma via art, music, medicine, philosophy, science, mathematics, all of it, so we gain a relevance that goes beyond. And of course, we do have support of a spread of yoga, Vedanta, Buddhism, Sanskrit worldwide. It can be very naive and misinterpreted in some areas, but there is a positive opening for that as well. So we also need to expand, not simply defend, but expand the teachings and expand the Dharma. My rule is 2/3 offense and 1/3 defense. You have to have the defense, but at the same time, you have to expand the teachings. I think Ram Swaroop also expanded a lot of the teachings as well. Sitaram Goel was more raising that voice that we have to respond. We can't just simply be quiet, and we have to have a powerful critique, and we have to use the weapons of the age, which is the intellectual power, now social media, and all the other forms of media. So I think if we do that, we can make great gains, and I think publications and even programs like this are going to help. And we also have to remember that we often have to do it ourselves. There's certain limitations as to what governments can do, and also there's a lot of, these other organizations have a lot of support, so we have to build up our own support network, which is occurring. And we have to have a sense of camaraderie and brotherhood or sisterhood. And what I say is try to support anyone who is helping Hindu Dharma in some way. It may not be what you want to do. You may think it's deficient in some areas, but if it's at least positive in a certain light, let's push that forward. And of course, Ram Swaroop and Sitaram Goel were key voices in this entire Hindu movement.
Yeah, you said very important things, that in the last 30 years, there has been very considerable gains, and we should not be impatient. Whoever is doing something, we should try to support them. So on this positive note, I would like to thank you very much. It has been an honor to talk with you and about the great subjects, Sitaram Goel and Ram Swaroop. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Shankar.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Press the bell icon on YouTube and don't miss another update.